Thank you, Zohar, and thanks so much for inviting me. And it's a special pleasure, of course, like for everybody else, to be celebrating Henry on this occasion. Henry was my colleague for 11 years at Yale. That's when I learned to know him. I learned to know him as an incredibly curious, astute, and sharp-minded law school professor, though he seemed to spend a lot of time in economics. So we were very glad, and we were in the same seminars and so on. A highlight was perhaps when I invited Henry to be the keynote speaker for a big cooperative at the 100th anniversary, and Mariana and Henrik both were in Finland, and we got to spend some time with our families together. It was a terrific time. So I have a lot of fond memories. Even more so, in some sense, I have been an admirer from day one to the book on ownership. At every corner of opportunity, I have praised it, I have discussed it, I have written about it, because I really think it's one of the really central pieces in organization economics. Surprising, clearly written, pointing out a big hole in our thinking. We all thought mostly about, about investor-owned companies, as Henry put it. And then this brilliant, almost like Sherlock Holmes-like idea of, I studied the non-investor-owned companies in order to figure out why the investor companies are good. I mean, I can't get over it. I find this, it's so rare, but it's sort of the dog that didn't bark that was the evidence of something. And it was a surprising answer in some ways. So I join everybody else here in praise. Let me say a few additional things, which was from one of my comments, which was that family businesses, which I know well because my wife has a family business, non-traded. Family business can be a problem, and the reason it's a problem because there's a heterogeneous set of opinions, and they can't be released easily by trading. So one of the things to add to this list of why investor-owned companies are so valuable is definitely the ability to trade, and to, in that sense, release conflict. Conflicts of interest can be settled. And there's, of course, the famous Fisher theorem of separation theorem that says that if in complete markets, we all will share whatever our beliefs and opinions, we will all have the same opinion of what's the best way forward is. So I would just comment. It's not a weakness. It's just a comment about the point of trading. That's an important part and a leg up relative to cooperatives, which have, for instance, other kinds of cooperatives in Henry's language that have problems with this side. I can't help but add, Henry's sort of insights. Henry, in some sense, he didn't say it, but his stuff points out a weakness in Friedman's argument, and there's a lot of opinion. Oliver and I don't share our opinion of what Friedman said, which is my fault because I'm a Finn and he speaks English. But the point is, let me just tell what everybody believes Friedman said, including Luigi, because I read his article and I understood it. So it is basically, as you maximize shareholder value, you take care of everybody else. To put it very simply, you are just going to take care, and because in some sense Henry's argument is, well, that doesn't explain why shareholders should be. The same argument can be made on workers, or anybody, any of the patrons could also maximize, be by the constraints of the shareholders. So of course we know, and I don't want to go into the fact that that line of reasoning does give another explanation of why shareholders are, the investor-owned companies are so important. because it doesn't quite go through the argument the way I suggested. But the idea is that one needs to look at, what, as it's told colloquially, anybody else can say the same. Give it to me, and I will have to take care of everybody else. And it's in my own interest. And it has to do with being residual claimant, but I leave it at that. I thought I wanted to say something different, in the sense that I wanted to speak what I have been interested in and I know something about, rather than pretending that I know something about what I'm speaking. And that is the change in I think a kind of revolutionary almost change in the way businesses are run. I'm talking about platforms, digital platforms. And it's interesting that in this whole conference, there's very little spoken about what happens inside the company. It's all about, the owners of one kind or another, and, who should own it, or corporate governance, what the shareholders have say. I think what I want to argue is that it's important to understand also what happens inside companies and in the technologies and so on. And because the functionality of what companies want to do or need to do has to have some implications for also governance issues. But I'm not saying that, I'm not going to propose what exactly it is, but I want to tell you what I think. I'm rather taking it from the point of view of what does our theory of ownership or theory of the firm, let's generalize it to the theory of the firm, advise us about how to read what's happening with these platform companies. And for that, I have to make a little detour to sort of two things. It's Oliver's and Sandy's view of the theory from, and their remarkable book. By the way, Henry Hansmann has a wonderful comment on Oliver on the GH25 conference that I warmly recommend to read, because it sort of summarizes his own view in a very concise way. And then I would say something about my own view, which is it's a little eccentric, but relates to yesterday's talks. So we know, I don't have to rehearse it, Grows My Heart is an incomplete contract story. And the point they are making is hold-ups has not just costs, but they also have benefits. And I want to emphasize the benefit side. And that when I give decision rights to Oliver, which I never do, but if I were to give Oliver decision rights, he would be better off and I would be worse off, so to speak, or weaker in this bargain. So the decision rights and the residual decision rights specifically are, in sense, bargaining chips of sorts. That's one way of thinking about it. And they are looking to the way the papers are written. There is no firm really. There's just they are just individuals. So it's not about the firm, at least inside the firm. It is about, basically, I'm talking about one article. It is about, how do you play the game strategically in the market, or how should sort of things be allocated so as to get the market outcome to be so good. So as I emphasize, I think this is a paper actually about the market and what's so good about entrepreneurship. And it is, as such, it is, in my view, the first really serious on first principle based paper on the market. So that's how I'm thinking about his paper. So it's outward looking. I think I have thought a fair amount about, what this means for inside. And so ownership means also something important inside. I think firms own basically all the productive assets, or in the traditional firm. And why do they do that? Because that gives them power to set the rules of the game. It's sort of in a children's world. When we were children, the guy with the bat and the ball, he decided what game was being played according to what rules. There were occasional good players. They had human capital and they could also influence the decision. But on the whole, it's a designing the playing field and the game that's being played. And the firm takes out stuff from the market because the market has two narrow-minded or too strong incentives. So the firm is in the business of actually giving low-powered incentives and taking out, most of you, at least I have never gotten a bonus in my life, really. And so we are paid by time. And so how are we incentivized? We are incentivized by a lot of other instruments, job designs, promotion schedules, the sense of value, communications, you name it. So the businesses are using a lot more subtle, but in some ways still more powerful and rich set of instruments on how they influence people inside the firm. And I think that's partly a little bit when we talk about these soft values. They are not that soft from an economic point of view. They are very important values. The firm is not democratic, is a very important feature. They can design it any way it wants as long as they obey the rules. You can talk to Alan Schwartz about, how you design things within the, he just told, he does whatever he wants that doesn't conflict with with the law. So in some sense, that's the firm's prerogative. It can do that. And so what prevents them from being sort of irresponsible? Well, the very key word is exit. People don't have to come to my company. I don't have to hire them, and they don't have to come when I make an offer. This exit opportunity is basically the same as saying they have choice, and choice leads to competition. So Friedman, who I'm not very big fan of Friedman, by the way, you may get my idea wrong, but he had a way with words. He chose the title free to choose. He didn't choose that competition or something like that, because free to choose is something you can do something about. Competition you can't create. You can't say now there's going to be competition, except of course Europeans think that they can, just tell people they will be the most competitive part of the world in year 2010. It didn't happen, and now they have other proclamations, now. The other thing to say, I wanted to say, second best, since it came up yesterday, the firm is the place where second-best theory plays itself out. The firms orchestrate these incentives. That's the view that Paul Milgram and I have. Second-best theory fits beautifully in the firm because they are competing with the whole organization. They have every reason to understand second-best theory. Whereas government, it doesn't even understand the most basic things and forget about second-best theory. So it's funny that they have tried to, and there is no exit. They don't compete with anybody to sort of force them to apply these principles. And so firms are internalizing externalities to bring back, something that was discussed yesterday. And the internalizing externalities came up in an odd sort of context just about, environment or something like that. I'm saying externalities are contractual inside the firm. These are massive externalities everywhere, and the firm is internalizing them within, organizing so that these get internalized inside the firm. So that's the final word on this sort of view of the firm as a sub-economy, as I call it, is that it is a big difference between government exactly because of the exit. This came up yesterday. Henry, actually, in your evening talk, you said you weren't sure, how this is, what's different? Why can't we just run them as private companies, these government enterprises? The answer is, there's no exit. That changes the game completely. It's not, but you suggested that there should be perhaps competitors, so that brings a little bit closer. But these islands are not like Iceland or something like that, because people can't exit from Iceland or don't want to. So the bottom line is that at the GH25, Williamson's story, which was, markets are the starting point. You know, if they don't work very well, we might go into the firm, but then he searches all sorts of problems with the firm, like low power incentives are a problem, you know, and this and that, and then you get back to the market. So it's a negative versus another negative, and that's how you get, that's the trade-off. Oliver's and this comment about the internalizing firm is a positive. You know, it's saying that, you know, the firm, the hold-up drives entrepreneurial spirit, and firms are good because of low-powered incentives, being substituted by something else. So it's just what Williamson thought was bad, you know, it's actually in this way looking at the good and good. I'm not saying these are two sides of the same coin, so one can look at it differently, but I think this is an interesting point of view. So why am I telling to you? Because this is, I try to tell you what I see as very summarized, some essential pieces of my thinking about the firm. And Oliver's thinking, I hope he shares at least the first part of my story. And the question is, there's a new kid on the lot. And that kid is, you know, dramatic. You know, the platforms, the digital platforms. Just to, first of all, it's quite new in the sense that Jobs didn't get it. He didn't want, you know, the app store to be open to, you know, third-party developers. He was, by the way, board members persuaded him to accept this, as did developers. So he thought he wanted to control it. So he was in this control mode. And I tell you, what would iPhone be without third-party apps and this whole app development? This was 2008. So we are not talking about a little more than 10 years ago. 2008, in the top 10 most valuable companies in the world by market cap, there was one platform business, if you want to think of it that way. It was Microsoft. It was number 7. 10 years later, there were 7 out of the 10 were platform companies. And today, I would say there are 8. So they are your usual suspects, which you have all touched, you know, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, and so on. And then 2 Chinese players, which are no longer perhaps there, given what's happening in China, but that's Alibaba and Tencent. And then the 8th player is what? Tesla. Tesla is not it's not in the first instance an electric car, it's not a car, it is a platform on wheels that processes enormous amounts of data every mile that it's driven and shares it with the whole community. And so totally, these companies, even without Tesla, it's about 25% of the whole market cap of the economy. People get shocked by this, and they are going to do something about this because it's alarming for, you know, there's the privacy concerns and these concerns. What I want to point out is that I think what this also shows, but this rarely gets pointed out, there must be enormous social value here. That's the first order of business. There's tremendous social value that we suddenly have become able, through digital technologies, to tap into. And so I'm just mentioning, you know, what are these enablers that we have, and I list mobile internet's got to be at the very top. You know, 24/7, all around the world. All the things it has done, you know, people in developing countries own a phone before they get water into their house. It's so valuable, and poor people understand value better than rich people. That's what Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo has taught us. So big data in the cloud. I mean, with that mass of data, you have to have it in the cloud. You couldn't be processing it. AI and machine learning is the processing, but this is the extraction machine, the algorithms that figure out what data isn't anything, but it becomes information through the AI. And there's a learning loop. It gets smarter and smarter and smarter. And the discontinuity for this event, there was a discontinuity. I mean, many people maybe here also think, you know, oh, this is all the same. We have heard about digitalization. Something very big happened in the last 10 years. And one of the things is the AI moved from trying to be deductive to actually inductive, which is the neural networks. There had always been these two branches. Neural networks was sort of a lost case. It was interesting, but it turns out neural networks with data, bingo, that's the winning game. And you know, maybe they get back to the AI thinks like a child. Child just looks at things and they don't learn by, you know, deducing things. They learn by just something we don't understand. But at least I don't understand. I don't understand actually that I've been a child. The fact is that we lose it. We can't anymore learn like a child at this point. We have substitute and deduction. So I think that's an interesting question. But that step may be what AI will at some point also try to take. I think what they are saying, this deduction is really the value of theory, but I'm not entirely sure. So that's the discontinuity. And the thing that creates value, when you look at why are they so valuable, you know, why is Tesla worth $900 billion? And Daimler is worth 90. That's an $800 billion gap for what? It's got to be data. You know, there's other SpaceX, other things, you know, but I believe it is really data. But you go all through this data and you go and see how they are based on this digital technology. You see scalability is the answer. Scalability and the speed with which they can spread. They can reach, the world is a village in the minds of these people. So it comes from the fact that, that Paul Romer calls that non-rival good. The information is a non-rival good. So it can be duplicated endlessly. You can send one email, you know, and it costs no more to send 100 or 1,000 or 100 million, you know, it all goes and you can reach everybody in the world in principle in a few seconds or maybe faster. So this enormous scalability is really, it makes for zero distance. It makes for almost zero marginal cost, fixed cost high, yes, but marginal cost almost zero. And this is what you see. This is what explains, you know, also the 800 billion difference. So this has had big impact on the strategic shifts, which I'm coming now to, you know, how the firm that is actually a platform business, how different it behaves. And I'm taking this from a lot of people who have written about it. I have studied it, but some of it I've learned from being on the Loan Academy in China, working with Alibaba. That's actually where my interest started. And one is that if you think now about what do they do, I said it before, they were sort of, you know, in my conception, they were kind of setting the rules of the game. They set different rules. They are really growing communities. Assets are not a big deal anymore for these companies. Airbnb has no assets. You know, Apple owns assets, but also the people on the platform, they don't own the people's assets, obviously, on the platform. So this is all asset light in a way that means that they can't actually, it would be very hard for Daimler to somehow buy something and then become just a Tesla. And because it is coming from growing this community, so there's a strategically, there's this unbelievable race of, you know, selling at sort of negative profits just to get scale. Because once you get scale, the network externalities, not externalities, effects come into play, and you become the biggest, and then it's self-enforcing, you become bigger and bigger, which is, of course, a big concern for the question about monopoly. And so strategic price, this is a very difficult game to play, very complex, dynamic game. But one of the instruments they use for control, to jump to the question of what do they substitute for assets, one of the instruments of control they have is the so-called APIs, application programming interfaces. This is how can I access, how if I want to do an app on Apple, I have to understand its API or get the developer to explain to me or or coder to understand. And that API will tell me what I have to satisfy, under what circumstances I could enter Apple's sort of house. And the same, so these are, some people call them, digital handshakes. So you're you're saying, okay, now you can come in on these terms. One of the remarkable things is these are totally unilaterally decided. It's just, Apple have changed those APIs. Developers certainly don't like to when the APIs get changed. Google has changed its API. The larger they have become, the more they have started to sort of extract money. They extract money. I mean, Apple's model is obviously to extract money from they take a provision 30% for some smaller players, 15%. That's their model, And the other guy, they the developers do the work for them. This is like Tom Sawyer, he sits there and stands there, and the other guys paint it, and he gets some money when they are doing it. So that's one model. There are other models. Google doesn't do that. It gets money from the advertising, so it's a different channel. But this is, I can't go into this in more detail, but I'm just suggesting this is very far in certain sense away from the idea we had original about, you get grip by having assets that you own, and, as I said, in my conception at least, own all the assets. And so there's also, it is very cozy in the sense, I think they are thinking about, maximizing the pie. They have to have a mindset where they are thinking about all the players and what the value means for all the players, not just, in the whole ecosystem. And what's happening sort of economically is that they come and they look for eliminating intermediaries. And that's what's happening. Because these algorithms are capable of replacing intermediaries. They are the new, algorithms are the new intermediaries in a lot of places, especially so in banking. Banking has been, so you just look at, for instance, mortgages, they are intermediated today. Over half of it is through fintech companies. That has happened very fast. And they also eliminate frictions, of the kind that we are talking about, asymmetry information, how do I know should I give a loan to this guy, and so on. Well, data will replace collateral. Because data has the information. Collateral is a way of avoiding to collect information. That's my view, and others as well. So the collateral is sort of a way of avoiding the costly information acquisition. We are now returning to a situation where actually collecting information, because it comes automatically from the way we behave, that actually replaces collateral. And so this is something that was very big for Ant Financial or Alibaba until this lockdown. And you may have heard about Jack Ma saying that, collateral is, the pawn shop is sort of old-fashioned, and the new thing is this information as collateral, and the Chinese leadership was not happy about that. But it's true. It doesn't mean that you can replace all things without, we will see collateral a lot still, but it makes it very inclusive for the small players to join. So I would say that for our theories, I close by saying something about theories. I think theories will be important. Incomplete contracting will be important, and so on. But I think if I were starting anew as an organization economist, I would certainly put my mind through not the traditional firm, but these new kinds of firms, and what is their business model, what is their business logic. And I think actually what we have done in organizational economics, I tried to hint at it, we do have an understanding of it. Let me just close by Amazon, which is in some ways the most remarkable of these players. I would say the most advanced in this direction. And two things bring up, one of which is they have just opened themselves up as an innovation community. They have given APIs so that you can innovate things in Amazon. You can come up and suggest they don't even know who you are until they read it. You just go in. Anybody can sort of enter and try to make improvements or try to contribute to some pieces of it. And as long as they follow the API, and I don't quite know how they choose it, but this is a very bold move because they also allow them to enter into some of their data in order to be able to do that. Not only that, Jeff Bezos sent out an email to all his employees. So this was a one press example of how it says. He wrote a little email and said, by the way, from date X, and I don't remember, was it 1 month ahead or 2 months ahead, he said, after this, all data communication within the company happens with the same APIs that sort of type of API that the outsiders can use. The outsiders don't get to all the inside APIs, but the same, we are now an API-based company. This is a Bezos manifesto. And he said, anybody who doesn't obey this order will be fired. And then he said, have a nice day. and with one sweep, this company became an API-driven data. That is, every day you wouldn't bring a piece of paper that says, this is, these are my numbers from last year. It had to be all communicated through the API, because then they see who is making the money in the company and who isn't. This makes the company inside totally transparent to everybody, almost. And so that was a very big deal. The other thing he has constantly done is he has jumped to other industries. He's all the time looking. And with this sort of platform economy and this data-driven values, what is proximate in the industry has completely changed. It isn't, we used to say, well, we do steel. And then you could list who were the companies, and the SIC code would give it. That's all being upset because people merge because of data. They can buy something very strange just because of the data. And in fact, when you look at what has been bought and what is being bought all the time, sometimes it's very hard to understand why did they pay this amount of money for this. We remember Facebook, I don't remember what they bought. But a year or two later, you understand, oh boy, that was the idea. And it has to do, I'm just putting it this way, it has to do, you have to put your lens on and ask yourself, how does a company look like in a world where data is driving wealth? Thank you very much. Well, I'm okay if anybody has any questions. Yeah, so I should have finished. I had a different sentence to finish, but I was going too hot a little bit. The sentence I wanted to finish with, let me read it to you. $1 trillion challenge. How to tap the enormous value of data without infringing on privacy and without causing monopolies. So I think of that as sort of really, I'm serious, $1 trillion. I mean, there is the thing I want to communicate, there is just this fantastic amount of value. Let alone you can whine about their big value, but at least the social value, I mean, they could capture it from somebody else, but social value is just enormous, that potential social value. And, unfortunately, because of the network effects, this has this tendency of, as they try to, I should say they orchestrate, corresponds to this idea of setting the rules of the game, but they kind of orchestrate because they can't command anybody, but they can sort of they can design the field in a way that's favorable for them and is attractive. And they have done an awfully good job. But they are going to be cut down to size, I'm sure, and China has started, and it's, Europe has nothing to cut down to size for because they are not even begun the thing, but they are regulating already. But I don't know what they are regulating because they don't have, by the way, I was going to mention this, how many have heard about Anu Bradford? I'm now here in Columbia University, I'm talking about one of your colleagues. Anu Bradford is the one who wrote a very interesting book. She's really interesting. A book about the Brussels effect, you know, about how to regulate. And she's very proud, and rightly so. It has been adopted about a lot of countries. Unfortunately, also China and you know, Russia and so on. You know, but my question to Europeans when I talk to them, how are you going to make money by regulating? I mean, they are very pleased that they are sort of taken to high moral ground with the regulation. But they seem to me, I think I'm going to send Alan to Europe. You had the right phrase, you know, you need to make money is, what was the phrase? I don't remember. But yes, so this is the answer. This is an enormous problem, but I wanted to emphasize the good side of it because you hear so much about the problems. Yes, I think they are far ahead, for instance, any of the Daimlers and so on, because these algorithms become smarter, but they are like children that are learning and growing up, except they learn at the speed that's hugely faster than the child. And it's the whole fleet, you know, as they are driving, they get smarter and smarter. And you will be the first to know as an owner of Tesla. You will notice that as you are driving, I have driven, by the way, a Tesla. It will suddenly do something different. You make something different in a place, and you know, this is not my car, so I asked, what is it doing? He said, well, it probably has seen something had happened here. It didn't work out the way it did, or there's a new mark or something like that. So they are constantly learning. How valuable that itself is, I'm not entirely sure, but you understand that once you have a community of Tesla owners, you can sell to them all sorts of things. Universities understand that. You know, once you have the alumni, they are captive, you know, you can suddenly leverage it. So that's what they are doing. They are not just, you know, using the data for their cars, they are using data for advertising or whatever they do. You know, it's sort of data will, this community that is in your sort of control, so to speak, will be a huge leverage point for making money. It's impossible almost to tell. I'm sure they don't have a roadmap precise. Lucian. Yeah. Actually, the way this works at Alibaba and other places is they are talking basically like credit card loans mostly for consumers of very small companies. But the latest report is that actually it has had a knock-on effect also on the bigger companies and it actually, the companies are now the bigger growth in financials. But the idea is that you go and do something and you are judged to be trustworthy. You know, that's basically the simple mechanism. If you wish, you are good for this. You don't apply for money in the Alipay system. They will send you a message and say, do you want to take a loan of this size?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.